Everybody, Andy here again. Well, as I'm sure you're aware, this week has been the 40th anniversary of the first landing on the moon by Neil Armstrong and Buzz Aldrin and the whole Apollo 11 journey that took place, obviously, 40 years ago this particular week. And it's one of those sort of things. I thought I'd talk about it. I've been thinking about this for a while. I knew the anniversary was coming up because it's something that I've been interested in. Space exploration, you know, where we're going, what we can do, that whole astronomy thing and what's out there and looking at the night sky, etc, etc. Something I've always had an interest in. So I followed the Apollo landings and even the space shuttle, the International Space Station. I try and keep an interest in it. And it suddenly dawned on me that the whole sort of space age since sort of Sputnik was the first sort of artificial satellite that went off around the world, around the Earth back in 1959, that sort of coincided with my life more or less. That's the sort of 51 years that I've been alive, but pretty much the whole time that what we class as a space race has been going on. So I've lived literally through every single moment of it. So it makes you think back to it. I remember the earlier days, shall we say, when I was growing up, etc., as a schoolboy, hearing about the Apollo or even the Gemini missions and things like that. Before I remember the first outside walk, the first spacewalk, I think, that took place by an American astronaut. I remember that vividly. I remember the build-up to the Apollo missions, all of those as well. And the two that stand out for me, I suppose, are Apollo 11, obviously, because we all have our memories about that, about where we were, and so many people watched it at the time. I was a child of 11 years old at the time, and I remember following it. But over here, the actual landing on the moon and the first, the only moonwalk that they took on Apollo 11 actually happened in the early hours of the morning, and I distinctly remember being woken up by my father and sort of went back downstairs, and we watched these sort of grainy images from 250,000 miles away on that spot that we could go outside and have a look up in the night sky. That men were actually walking on that, and it was an amazing thing at the time, because technology, although we thought technology was wonderful, it was still amazing that we actually got that far. Yes, I know that we've never gone back, obviously, since Apollo 17, but it was a great achievement, something that was completely different. Now we look back and think, well, yeah, we could do that probably quite easily, even if we haven't. So that was the one thing that stood out for me. But the other thing that came out of that whole Apollo space race type thing was the fact that although there was the race for the moon, whether we like it or not, it was the race to the moon between the Americans and the Russians, and it all came out of President Kennedy's speech, and it all came out of the Cold War, and one side wanting to beat the others. The Russians were trying to get them. There's that sort of suspicion that the Apollo missions, I wouldn't say rushed, but they were certainly egged along. President Kennedy said, we want to send a man to the moon and return him safely to Earth before the end of the decade, and they very nearly didn't do that. And apparently, even the Apollo 11 mission itself, I saw something with Buzz Aldrin the other day who said they thought they only had about a 50-50 chance of actually completing the mission successfully. Now that's a pretty hell of a gamble, that is. I think 50-50 chance to do it, but they felt they had to do it because the Russians were landing probes on the moon, etc. about the same time, and they didn't know what was going to happen next. But the other thing that really stuck in my mind was the Apollo 8 mission, which was the one that went up with, I think it was Jim Lovell, Frank Borman, but it was at Christmas in 1968, I believe it was. And that had a profound effect, but that had an effect bigger than, in some ways, anything else that took place, because, as I said, we were in a race for the moon, but when we went to the moon, we actually ended up finding the Earth, if that makes any sense. And I'm not the only person to say it. I haven't thought of this myself. This is something that some of the other astronauts, etc., have said in the past. When they turned round and they looked back, they saw the Earth. They were the first people to ever see the Earth as a whole, shall we say, and seeing it from space, away from orbit. Even the people that are in orbit now, the space station, etc., the space shuttle astronauts that go up there, they're still within the confines of Earth. They're still within the draw of the Earth. When you break those bonds and you fire your rockets away from the Earth, and then you have to use the moon to get yourself back, which is what the Apollo astronauts had to do, they were on a completely different trajectory. They were going away, and they had that chance to look back and see the Earth of what it was. We probably all remember those photographs that were taken on the Apollo 8 mission of Earthrise, and photographs that were actually taken inadvertently. There was no plan to take photographs of that. No one had ever thought about that sort of side of it, but they were looking at the moon. They were focused on the moon. They weren't thinking about turning around and looking over their shoulders at what had gone and what they would be coming back to. But it just happened. I think it was Frank Borman who had some shots and looked out the window and had to think, wow, look at that. And he took those iconic images that we've seen now, and I think he only took about 2 or 3 photographs, and luckily they came out the way that they did. But that whole thing, that whole idea of looking back, as I said, that whole idea of not going to the moon, but actually finding the Earth inadvertently, a bit of an accidental discovery then, has changed our lives in lots of different ways, as much as possibly the Apollo 11 moonshot did. That changed our lives in certain ways, but the Apollo 8 mission changed it in another way. The whole environmental movement was really, not say triggered, it had started in the 60s because of what the 60s did anyway, and the way that we changed our thoughts and the way we dealt with things and the freedom that came. It made us think about the Earth. But when we look back at the Earth then and saw it as such a fragile blue, pale blue dot, as Carl Sagan said, and I think Frank Borman said he could sort of stick his thumb up there and he could actually cover the whole of the Earth with just his thumb, and that was really stuck home to him then, just how far away they were and just how fragile this world that we live on actually is. And most of that, as I said, all the environmental things that have come from them, come from, whether we know it or not, really looking at those photographs, and you look at that and you think, wow, now that's the only place we've ever got. I may well put a link over here to Carl Sagan's pale blue dot, some of the videos that have been made of his speech that came about from one of his books. Very, very good speech. Things that he said in there is that this is the only home that we've got. Everyone who's ever lived has lived on that tiny little island that's in the middle of space there. Something that makes you think a little bit. So think about that. We didn't also just go to the moon. We found the Earth at the same time, and maybe we found a newfound respect for the Earth. Sometimes that respect is a bit lacking, but it's something that we still need to do, because as Carl Sagan said, this is the only home we've got, and at the moment we haven't got much hope of finding another one, not in the near future anyway, so we need to look after what we have got. Anyway, thanks for your time. I'll speak to you again soon. Yep.